Welcome back, guys. I hope you are enjoying the discussion we are having about the purpose of human life and trying to find who we are. I hope you understood the purpose of life in previous videos and why it is so. That is, the purpose of human life is to keep the sum total of our perceptions to be as joyful as possible over our lifetime. In this video, we are going to create a model of who we are. In this video, we are going to create the model of who we are that resolves the issues we discussed in the past video. We will first talk about how a robot sees the world. Thus, we can understand how perception is created in the robot and we can observe what is going on as an external observer. So guys, let's watch a robot video. Guys, if you see how the robot walks or climbs a stair in the video, what goes through his brain, its CPU and its memory? Examining this info will help us to understand how we see the things. Now understand that the way we have consciousness is not the same as a robot has consciousness, but we can assume that it does. Really, it does not matter for our discussion purposes, but let us assume that the robot is conscious of its memory and what passes through its CPU. Guys, let us first understand how robot sees the world and additionally how robot sees itself. Let us first draw the head of the robot. This is the head of the robot. In this slide is the head of the robot that we saw walking, climbing in the video. A computer has memory and CPU. Let us consider CPU and its memory as brain, as our brain has processing power and has memory. CPU and memory does not have consciousness like we do, but let us assume that it does for this discussion. So CPU can see the content of memory and what passes through its CPU. The figure in this slide represents the memory of the robot. So this is the memory, guys, the one which is ones and zeros. In actual robot, the memory is one-dimensional and it is located on memory chip. But here we are showing it as if it occupies three-dimensional space for ease in our understanding. So folks, how does the robot sees the world in the diagram? It has two eyes made out of photoelectric cell that takes the light signal and converts it into electrical signals like our eyes do. So these are the two eyes. This electrical signal gets converted to digital signal and the info about the world is stored in its memory. So it gets stored in this memory here. The robot sees also itself as it has to know its position among the worldly objects. In the diagram, the smaller cube represents, this is the smaller cube. The smaller cube represents the representation of a robot's brain itself in its memory. And now this is important, guys. For a robot, the definition of outside is anything outside its own brain's representation, but that is still within its memory. So this is outside. Thus the outside objects like door, table, etc. are still in its memory. So door is represented here in its memory, table is represented here. So all these worldly objects are represented in its memory. So this is inside and this is outside for a robot. The whole world is represented in its memory and the robot sees himself in that memory. So the outside world and representation of itself is stored in its memory. Here representation of the robot itself can be its own body or just be brain. The diagram shows the definition of outside is outside the brain. Now let us clarify one more thing. The robot does not know anything about the physical solid objects in the real world domain. What it sees is the codified representation of solid objects in ones and zeros. So we need to define the domain of physical objects. So the domain of physical objects where the table, chair exists here, we call it external world. The reason we call it our external world is for robot, this is internal world, this is the external world, and this is the external world that robot is unaware of. So we need to define that domain of physical objects. We prefix those objects with EE meaning external. The robot is unaware of these EE objects that are solid objects that we can see. Here we are assuming that we can see the real world objects, but like a robot, we also see our codified representation too. And each of our codified representation can be different as our neurons forms different connections for each of us during our childhood growth. So let's look into how the robot sees the door or a table, that is EE door and EE table. So rays from EE table gets reflected and gets absorbed by EE eyes of the robot and gets converted and represented in its EE brain. This is also true for us. For human being, there is an EE world that exists that we are not aware of, where the real world objects exist. Like a robot, light rays reflected from EE table enter into our EE eyes and gets converted into EE nerve signals and passes through EE optic nerve to EE visual cortex, where the picture is created of table, eyes, and human being himself. And outside and inside definition is created that whatever is outside of human beings' representation is outside world. In the above diagram, we are going to define outside as outside of our brain. So the outside of the brain is external objects. So the large oval represents EE brain, that is this one. And within itself, brain is represented, and outside the brain, the codified representation of worldly objects are represented. So this is the brain itself gets represented in the EE brain, and this is the outside objects. So what are the internal objects in the diagram? These are the thoughts and emotions. So these are the internal objects, and these are the thoughts and emotions. Guys, this is little complicated. Think about it and figure it out for yourself, and you will understand what I'm talking about. For more information, you can refer to my book, The Purpose of Life, an investigation of the meaning of life based on reason by Shrihas Shah, available on Amazon. So let us ask a different question at this point. For a robot, if you ask a question, what is the real world objects made of? The robot is going to answer, the real world objects are made up of ones and zeros. That is similar to when we say the real world objects are made of atoms, and atom is made of proton, neutron, and electron and some other particles. But we can see that in the EE domain, the real world objects are unknown to us, and our definition of what world is made up of is our knowledge within our EE brain only. In previous videos, we have said we will consider the question, how can we communicate about shared objects if we only have access to our private perceptions? Robot knows only its private perceptions but can only see the shared objects in its memory and share with other robots their own private perception of shared objects. This is how Alexa talks to us. Guys, we have seen the model of who we are, and this resolves the issues that we discussed in the previous video. What the conclusion reinforces is that our life is nothing more than the series of perception that our EE brain has created, and thus the purpose of human life is to keep the sum total of our perceptions to be as joyful as possible. Our life is nothing more than the movie created by our EE brain. Without such a movie, we would be living like a stone if we were unconscious throughout our life. Folks, though, let's not go crazy over our purpose of life. If we pursue our life to make our perception to be joyful, we are going to be in serious trouble, as we will try to live hedonist life. We will ask a different question in the next video, that why do we need to find the purpose of life? It is an important question. Why there is such a need? Also, we will discuss our perception of feeling of emptiness or void, that is the major source of our painful perception in our life, in the next video. Also, we will discuss surrendered life later on too. Guys, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video, where we will talk about our perception of emptiness and void that gives the most painful perception in our life. Our emptiness and feeling of void drives most of our lives. Folks, see you in the next video. Thank you.